the first 90 seconds. So.
Tonight I just missed the introduction. So.
Okay.
Welcome.
You know, now I can't avoid this camera. So, as Jeff mentioned, we want to keep this pretty informal. Won't spend too much time on WEF as a whole, but just in general, as a nonprofit organization that has been around since 1971, really aiming to improve the state of the world. And that can mean any number of things, which to me is one of the beautiful things about WEF. And I think what's so fascinating to me about Global Shapers is two driving principles behind Global Shapers. And point to Des Moines, Central Iowa instances, because young professionals have almost become this the golden children, if you will, that, you know, we're the best city for young professionals, for millennials, for attracting young people. How do we attract them, retain them, all sorts of stuff. But what does that actually mean? And I think WEF has done an outstanding job by creating the Global Shapers Initiative, which is just a few years old, but really the impetus behind creating this new arm, if you will, of WEF is twofold. To further the mission of bettering the world, and again, that can mean any number of things, but really taking that to the local level, and we'll get into what that means from the Des Moines perspective, but empowering young people to do that. So what does that look like? And then also getting young people a seat at the decision-making table. And to me, that's the extremely exciting component of Global Shapers, is we don't want to have a token young professionals group and then the big kids table making all the decisions. We want the young people at the table. And I don't know of many other organizations that take that approach. It's always that separation. So we're very excited about that opportunity. Frankly, none of us knew about Global Shapers up until, let's see, what was that, 2014, 2015?
Something like that.
Somewhere in there. So
well, it only started in 2000.
yeah, so we were not too far into it, but is everybody in here on LinkedIn? For most people. And you know, you get like random messages, just kind of spam messages different times. So, you know, I check them just to see, you know, is there a business development opportunity? What's going on? So I got one sometime in that time frame, 2014, 2015, from someone with WEF. I didn't know much about them. Basically, the pitch was, if you start a Global Shapers Hub in Des Moines, we'll send you on a free trip to Geneva. So that wasn't really too tough of a decision
I gotta check my
to
LinkedIn
make.
more often.
Exactly, and you're on Facebook, other filtered messages as well. So that was basically the start of Global Shapers in Des Moines. They were really looking to expand aggressively at that time, build the hubs. At that time, there were 450 hubs, counting our new cohort, kind of those tier 2 communities, if you will, the Boise, Idahos of the world, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, up in Vermont, a couple of other areas that were starting the same time as we were. So all these people were getting these messages of, hey, start us and we'll send you to Geneva. So that was kind of where we were born. Josh has been involved almost from the beginning, and Lindsay, you joined a year or so after, I believe. So I will say, I think WEF is still figuring out what Global Shapers really is. There's a lot of autonomy for the local hubs, which is one of the exciting things, again, empowering young people to improve the communities that we live in. They define young people as ages 20 to 30. Which is fascinating. I have now aged out, but as the founding curator, I can still be a little bit involved. You know, maybe I'll go to the big kids table one of these days. But with that, I want to turn it over to Josh and Lindsay to talk a little bit more about some of the projects. I think that's the next thing on our list and what we're working on.
Yes. And so when I got involved, Bethany sent me an email saying, hey, I just got sent on this free trip to Geneva. Do you want to join this thing? And maybe you'll get to go sometime too. And then a year later, there I was in Geneva. So again, the value of checking your messages.
I may have told him the year that I went to Geneva, the last night we took a 3-story yacht and cruised on the lake, and they didn't get to do that.
There was no yacht my year. Yes. It was the biggest disappointment of my Global Shapers experience to date.
Just fought you.
But one thing, so to your point about giving young people a place at the decision-making table, the one thing you may know about the World Economic Forum is that they do a convening every year in Davos, Switzerland. You hear about Davos. So basically a convening of all the world leaders, all these CEOs, very important people, and they actually select 50 global shapers to be able to attend Davos every year. So every spring they put out a call and people submit video applications, and they're given the opportunity to go to Davos and be among those people and participate and really get that seat at the decision-making table. None of us have gone, but I hope that someday somebody in our hub will be able to apply and go and experience
Here's our video.
that.
We can submit this one.
Yes.
Yes, it's just the pitch.
But since then, we've been, I guess, involved in a lot of projects to work on what we thought it looked like to make Des Moines a better place. We've all been involved in a lot of volunteer activities, thinking about the community really broadly in our day jobs, but we also continue that into our volunteer activities. We started out with a film screening down at Fleur Cinema, where the film was about a program in Los Angeles where people who were exiting prison were able to get involved in urban gardening and use that as a tool to sort of create a job for them, give them an outlet once they got out of prison for a long period of time. And so it started a good discussion about both urban gardening, which is something we had a lot of people involved in at the time, but also social equity issues. What do we do with people as they're returning to society from a long stay in prison? It was a great event. It was well attended. That's actually where Lindsay fell into the group. Lindsay attended the film screening, and
then Bethany and Josh came up to me and said, "Do you want to go to Geneva for free?"
Pretty much.
It's a good sales pitch, right?
So one thing that all three of us have been involved in is taking a leadership role within the hub. So every hub elects a curator and a vice curator. Bethany is forever our founding curator because she was the one that started the hub in the first place. We have elections every year, and then we pick out who the next curator and vice curator will be. The curator is usually the one that gets to go to the annual curators meeting, which is when we all got to go to Geneva, which is every August. We got set on a pattern of sending the vice curator because our curator was unable to go one year, and that was the year I went. So we now send our vice curators to go instead. I am the current curator of our Global Shapers Des Moines Hub, and Lindsay is our current vice curator, so she was able to go to Geneva last year. Project
Lindsay?
history? Yeah.
What would you like to add?
Well, try to fondue in Geneva.
Okay, before we get into that, are there questions about Global Shapers in general? I'll give you a couple examples of the year that I was in, some of the other projects from around the globe, and I think that's just been one of the most fascinating parts. Is I think it's probably grown since both of you have gone, but the year I went, as I said, 450 young people from around the globe, all mixing and mingling and learning together and thinking about how we can make the globe as well as our individual communities a better place. So literally all different cultures, and connecting with those individuals on social media. Just that fresh global perspective, I think, has been one of the enduring benefits from being involved with Global Shapers and going to Geneva, is that you continue to have those perspectives, and especially with the political situation as it currently is, it's been incredibly fascinating to see what the take on our country is in the different cities and the different happenings around the globe. But I think one of the projects that really stuck with me in Brazil, and there was one of the hubs, of course, there's major corruption with their voting systems there, and especially on the local level. So one of the hubs, and I think this shows the differences in communities and the development, one of the hubs there was looking at how they can address those corruption issues in voting at the local level. So they were digging into all sorts of intense crime data and looking at where are these long-lasting trends at, and how that is seeping into the elections. Just this morning, I was on WhatsApp. One of our Indian hubs was talking about some event that they're planning collaboratively. So these things continue, that communication continues. There's some projects in Africa the year that I was in that were related to putting wells in or getting young people access to shoes, things that we take for granted here. But it really puts in perspective some of the issues that we're dealing with in the Des Moines metro and how good we really have it. That we don't have these horrible issues, at least not on a widespread scale. But I think that's one of the valuable things. I know we've done some connections, webinars with different hubs from around the globe, and that's been an eye-opening opportunity for us. And again, not just for the shapers, but opening that up to the community to share that understanding, because I think that's probably one of the underlying forces of global shapers as a whole.
And one thing that they've done that's interesting is in the last couple of years, they've taken on some global themes. So hubs from around the world will say, okay, we're all going to focus on this issue and how it relates to each of us in different ways. The year I went to Geneva, all the presentations were about water. They had an initiative called Shape Water. They had someone from the Detroit hub talking about the Flint water crisis just after that happened and how they had been organizing bottled water delivery to people in Flint. They had been going door to door and passing out water, assessing needs, figuring out where to store water donations that were being received, and really just taking a hands-on role in a big crisis that was happening in their community, and just walked in and started making a difference. And I thought that was a really cool example of how a hub can get involved. Then on the other side of the world completely, talked to a hub from Mauritius, which is an island in the Indian Ocean. Their project was teaching kids how to swim. They had had kids drowning in the ocean recently, and so they decided that they were going to do swimming lessons, and they had taught hundreds of kids in their community how to swim, and that was their water-related project for the year. And so it kind of shows you the full breadth of the types of things that are being considered as hub projects because of the very different needs in each community. But there's still these unifying themes, and there's still inter-hub collaboration. These hubs were all talking to each other as they were developing their water-focused initiatives, sharing experience, sharing expertise. It's a really interesting thing to watch. And like Bethany says, you know, when you have all these connections from around the world in your Facebook feed every day, it gives you a completely different perspective of the world. And being there at the annual curators meeting and meeting all these people from places you would never ever have met in your life otherwise. It was a really eye-opening experience for me. One of the best friends I made there was a 22-year-old graphic designer from Khartoum, Sudan, and we never would have met. She can't even get a visa to come to the United States, and here I was taking her to a bar for the first time in her life, taking her to a cathedral. She was doing all sorts of stuff she had never been able to do, and it was a great time.
Yeah. The level of connection at ACM, the annual curators meeting, which is the big annual meeting, and ours was, I'd say about 400. I think they have, the World Economic Forum really wants to make sure that Global Shapers hubs are doing stuff. So if you're not very active, you'll not be continuing as a hub. You have to show that you have membership and activities and projects, and so 400 really awesome, motivated people from tons of cities around the world. I can't even explain the feeling. We were able to, at the very end, be in one of the UN rooms, and just being in the UN with like 400 future leaders of the world, it was so powerful. Getting to hear each other talk about your lives, getting to share what you wish you knew about other cities. The different partnerships that happen are really cool too. Like there's some hubs in India that have been getting a 5K event going. It's like this huge first time ever. I think the biggest 5K in India, highest altitude or something, some big deal. But I mean, the 5K, like how are you helping the world? They're bringing people to their city. They're bringing people to their area. And I think it's amazing when you think about how to help the world. Like people need shoes. People need to know how to swim. People need to be able to run 5Ks. I mean, there's just so many different definitions of how to help where you are, and then how help the world. And one of the things that hit me really hard when we heard Professor Schwab speak at the World Economic Forum was talking about, are you a local or like a city-based or country-based or global-minded person? And everybody raised their hands in different times, and he's like, ah! You know, like it's everything. They're all connected. Yeah, the actual time in Geneva was very educational, learning about WEF and people, and then afterwards the continuity of continuing to talk with your hubs, and then the hub here in Des Moines. So we meet like once a month to touch base about whatever our projects that are going on, and that's always fun to be picking what projects we're going to do because Des Moines has a lot of stuff going on here. So we have a film screening coming up, and that's how I found out about Global Shapers originally. So it was a really good way to get people interested in a topic and then start to realize that we can do whatever topic we want. It's really flexible.
What are the projects you're doing now?
So the film screening is the biggest thing we're doing now, and it ties into a global initiative like Shape Water that I was talking about earlier. This is called the We See Equal campaign, and it's all about gender parity across the world. So we think we're up to 30 or 40 hubs now that have committed to doing some sort of project in their community to either raise awareness about gender disparities in their communities or to do hands-on projects to make their cities more equal, whatever that looks like in their different cities. So we're still kind of learning what the other hubs are doing, but our plan is to have a film screening next Monday night. It's at 6 p.m. at the Franklin Ave Library, if anyone's interested. It's a BBC documentary called All That Stands in the Way. It's interviews 4 young women from 4 different countries around the world about their experiences and how they feel they're being treated equally or not equally to men in their community. So it's an interesting movie. We're following it with a panel discussion of 3 local women who have all different backgrounds but are united by wanting to see Des Moines become a more equal place for both genders. And it should be an interesting discussion. So we certainly welcome all of you to join us there. And we'll be continuing our gender parity efforts throughout the year. It seems like this is going to be a big topic for the World Economic Forum this year. Wouldn't be surprised if you hear about it when you're over there. Procter & Gamble and the World Economic Forum right now are working on a grant program where local hubs can apply for $20,000 grants to advance social equity, gender equity in their communities. So we're looking into our options about whether we should apply for that. I think we'll try to get something together here in the next month and apply for that. But hopefully we'll be one of the 400 some hubs that put something together that's successful. So it's another way that we can bring global resources to Des Moines in a way that wouldn't be possible without Global Shapers. It's been giving us a lot of opportunities too to collaborate across the world. We're on a WhatsApp call, which WhatsApp is like a little messaging app with people in Italy and Latin America and Africa, and they're all chatting about their ideas in this thread, and I'm scrolling through things every time I wake up, and there's like 50 messages from people overnight, and it's an interesting learning experience and really fascinating to be able to work with all these people.
So what have you found out about gender inequities in Iowa? Iowa has a bad record.
I think we're the lowest in women-owned businesses in the country. Is that?
And the inequity is one of the highest of all states between women and men, and especially for salaried people. And it's quite interesting that when you talk to people, they don't realize that. And the primary earner for a family increasingly in Iowa is a woman. And yet there's that huge disparity between what women make. So it's not just a woman's issue, it's a family issue. And if you talk about it as a family issue, it's really a community issue and then a world issue. And I think we isolate it too much and just say, well, this is a woman issue. No, it's a much broader issue. And it has to do with not only the parity we'd like, but to see our own backyards and our own nation in comparison with what's going on in Denmark, for example, or in Norway, or in Finland, or in other countries. And it's kind of humbling. I think it's very humbling. Okay, any other questions? What other projects are you on?
Go ahead.
Good
Yeah.
show. Good show. I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm curious if Global Shapers encourages you to connect with local and state initiatives. And are you doing that?
I would say it doesn't formally do that just because there's so much autonomy in how each hub operates. But I would say that's in probably a reflection of our backgrounds and the other Shapers' backgrounds is that culture of collaboration.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the two of you want to talk about, for instance, the movie screening.
Yeah, and the movie screening was a collaboration. The first movie screening we did about urban gardening was a collaboration among a lot of different organizations working in that space because most of the people in the hub at that time were involved in five
It
or
was
six
incestuous.
different, yeah, all these different organizations that were doing this. I think that reflects on Des Moines because we're always collaborating. And I think it reflects also on the US because we have the capacity here to collaborate better with local agencies. A lot of the hubs are working in cities and they're really the only people that are doing the types of things that they're doing and there are no opportunities for them to collaborate. Our plan is with the grant opportunity coming up, we're going to be working with some local organizations to figure out where we could kind of help them build capacity rather than create something new from scratch.
I see that kind of phenomena happen where we're all doing great things, and if we, get together and start sharing, we realize we're all doing similar things, and we can do so much more together. So.
Totally agree.
Yes.
What would you say that the World Economic Forum posits as the most serious global issue today? I mean, we could go around the room and I know what my most serious global issue would be. And I know Jeff's and some others, but what do the rest of you think about these major global issues? What are they? You heard the intelligence gurus before the Senate the other day. What did they say? It's from the Director of National Intelligence, CIA, FBI. All of these people, what did they say in unison? Was a big problem facing the United States and the world.
I think income inequity is probably one of the biggest factors that's out there. When basically 1% of the population of the world holds like 90% of all of the wealth of the world, it truly has a dramatic impact on how the world develops.
Who else has an issue? It's kind of interesting. If you go to Davos, 3,000 invited guests, right? Here's a statistic to remember. The top 400, you can fit them in 2 rooms like this. Their wealth is more than the bottom 4.5 billion of the world's population. Can you fathom that? And it's growing further and further apart. It's not decreasing, it's increasing. Now, does that create problems? Well, no. On the same hand, poverty level worldwide is going down. And when poverty level goes down, what happens to consumption? It goes up. And when you have more calories being burned, what happens to climate change? You see, it's quite an interesting connection, isn't it? All right, so that's it. What do you think, Emily?
So many.
Well, just one.
Hunger, world hunger.
Which one?
World hunger is a big issue.
Hunger.
Cybersecurity, there's so many.
Yeah,
My answer is always women's issues.
is what?
Women's issues.
And which particular women's issue? I know that there are a lot of them, but
I think the biggest one right now is, I mean, it depends, like if it's America, it's reproductive issues are a huge topic right now. And then if it's overseas or in like a more impoverished community, it's gonna be education. It just depends on where you are, but I think all of them are equally important depending on your location.
Now, Haley's background is she has worked overseas in different capacities. Tell us a little bit about what your experience is that would fit into this.
So I got my undergrad at Kansas State University, and it was in chemical engineering and brain science. And then I started my PhD at Kansas State in pathogenic microbiology. And so I worked with, while I was there, I worked in Tanzania, South Africa, and then occasionally I wouldn't go, but my counterpart would go to South America because she was from there and it was easier for her to communicate, and my Spanish is awful. And so what I would do over there and what she would do is we would teach women in small villages different farming techniques. And she was more of the grain scientist versus where I was more of the pathogenic side. So for example, when they would dry fruits, I would show them the moisture they had to have so that they wouldn't get, salmonella or various other, usually the big one over there is E. coli because of the cows that walk in their pastures. And then she would work with occasionally the water, and then she would also work with the teaching more because she could communicate better than I could. So it was like a full scale project. It was teaching the kids and women, and then working with them to implement, and then like watching them for years on, making sure everything was good, because it's not sustainable if you go over there and like this is how you do everything by. You have to teach them to teach themselves.
Anyone else want to contribute? Then we'll move on a little.
I would just add natural resources and conservation and recycling and anything that goes into green sustainability.
Well, my bias is all about climate change. And I think that's a big one. Each year that we delay making the conversion from fossil fuels to renewables, the cost to the world GDP is $500 billion. So start to figure it out. I was looking at China. For every dollar worth of value they produce, it costs the natural ecosystem $1.73. How long can you sustain that? If you're running a business and you're losing 73 cents for every dollar you made, how long would you be financially intact? And that's a big issue. Well, that's my bias. Who else has a comment here?
Well, I was just going to add that for the one thing about with climate change, Iowa has been very good about, thankfully, because of Mid-American and Lion, our major utilities, we have been reducing greenhouse gases substantially. Unfortunately, I just saw some data for last year, because we always get a year afterward. We actually will have about a 3% increase from our coal-fired power plants this last year, but we had been dropping drastically. And I know if people have heard about the Clean Power Plan that was in the news that the Trump administration has decided to get rid of, here in Iowa, we were actually going to be well within meeting the goals of 2030. I think we're projected about 2024 to meet the goals because of all the wind generation we have and the solar, which is disappointing that our legislature has been talking about getting rid of energy efficiency, because that is a big thing. And one of the things with our power plants, with all the wind generation, we actually are a net exporter typically. And the other thing about that is that actually has attracted quite a few businesses. They can talk about the amount of money given to Apple and Google and everyone else, but the reason companies like Apple and Google, Facebook, the data centers, they come to Iowa because of our wind generation,
solar, renewable energy. That is one of the first things they look at. It's not tax breaks or anything else. And some that was in the paper not too long ago, concerning our ethanol plants, down in Tennessee, they actually, it's just done at a lab scale. They're looking at doing it full scale. They were able to take CO2 with copper and electricity, and there's a couple other things, and they were actually able to convert it into ethanol. So if they're able to do that on a full-scale basis, they'll actually have quite the discovery there, because they could use that for our ethanol plants, because there's a lot of carbon dioxide that comes off of them yet. You could use the natural gas turbines. Coal-fired plants a little harder to get the CO2 out, but so there is quite a bit there. But Iowa is one of the leaders as far as has been in reducing its greenhouse gases.
We'll let you continue with your.
So I think we made it through all of our WEF global shapers. So Jeff had asked us to talk just generally about what makes a great city. And I think we really want to talk about Des Moines specifically. All of our careers have been entirely in Des Moines, I believe. And Jeff mentioned my background a little bit. So my first job was at the Metropolitan Planning Organization, where I oversaw the development of the Tomorrow Plan, which is the regional plan for sustainable development. You've probably seen a lot of the projects that have come out of that. The protected bike lane on East Grand, for instance, the formation of a number of the watershed management authorities, the water trails plan that is underway was one of the things that came out of that as well. And then immediately past position was with Capital Crossroads in the Greater Des Moines Partnership, looking at a variety of topics from regional governance and looking at how we can streamline building ordinances, to looking at mental health, to transit, to water quality issues. So variety of topics. And I think that's one thing that really sets our community apart. And it goes back to your question about that collaboration. I think that's something that is imperative for a community to be truly successful. We can't work in our silos because there is that redundancy. We're wasting resources and we're wasting time. That, when we look at climate change, we don't have all the time in the world, or water quality. We don't have all the resources to address that in a siloed manner. So I think that's one of the big keys to success that we've seen in Des Moines and any of these other communities that are doing really well, is they know how to collaborate, they know how to work together and really figure out what is going to be best for our community, not just next year, but in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. So I guess that would be a second key to success, is having that big vision.
I have a question here, Bethany. Kent is a water quality guy. So tell us a little bit about how you react to this water quality, let's say, as a global initiative.
Well, it seems like when you look at the president's budget came out for 2019, this always bothers me a little bit. So that all of the USDA gets $19 billion, which is a lot of money. But the president's budget calls for a $90 billion increase to defense, which kind of maybe goes to the point of, like what you were saying, safety in the world is important. The United States puts a lot of money into it. So all the $19 billion that USDA gives for water quality and food quality and the social programs continues to get cut, while the defense continues to make large jumps. And I'm not saying there's not enough money thrown at it. It's a group effort, getting farmers to, with tight margins, spend some money on water quality. I think there needs to be more people on the ground working with farmers, trying to get cover crops on the fields. That's be the number one thing. I mean, I work with edge of field effects because they don't take out of production but cover crops are the number one thing, and you just can't get enough people to do it. We need like 17 million acres of cover crops, and we have 500,000.
And the implications are what, when you don't have cover crops on you, and you don't have these protective areas next to the fields, so as you run off, what happens then?
Well, the cover crops pull nutrients as they grow and then deliver them back as your crop grows. So as long as you keep something growing all the time, you're not going to lose nutrients through the soil. And they're holding runoff from running off, which is phosphorus moves the soil, nitrogen moves the water. So through bleaching, through tile lines, which is the bigger problem here. But if you've got cover crops and something growing, you've always got something to maintain the nutrients that are in the soil there. And you can decrease the amount of nitrogen you have to put on, but if you drive across Iowa, you see that probably 50% of the time, it's on the growing season, it's still black.
That's interesting.
What makes a great city?
I think I am biased. I'm going to reveal all my biases here, but I am also an urban planner like Bethany. We both went to Iowa State's planning program.
I like your hat, by the way.
Yes. I have spent the years since I graduated working for the Polk County Housing Trust Fund. We are an affordable housing funding nonprofit that works to fund developers who are building affordable housing in Polk County, renovating existing housing, maintaining existing housing, and we do that in a bunch of different creative ways. I would normally echo what Bethany said about collaboration. I think we are a community that does collaboration incredibly well. That's the thing I think Des Moines is probably the strongest at. If you email somebody at another organization, you say, hey, I have this crazy idea, do you want to talk about it? They always say yes. I've never
We've
been
done
turned
that
down.
many times.
We've, yes, gone to other people with crazy ideas, had crazy ideas, yes, we've done it. It's a community that's really willing to listen to those things, try to think about things differently than they have in the past, and they're willing to try things out, and that's great. One thing I think Des Moines could do better is a stronger commitment to equity for all of its citizens. Working in the field that I work in, I see a lot of issues that are sometimes swept under the rug as a community. I think we have a more substantial poverty problem in this community than people are willing to recognize. I think people tend to just avoid that part of town and they don't see it and then they don't have to think about it. So a lot of what my organization does is we have done bus tours now for the last 5 years, taking people into some of the inner city neighborhoods where most people in poverty live in our community and show them what affordable housing looks like, because people have their own misconceptions about what it looks like. But I think there's also some value in just taking people into those neighborhoods and saying, you know, this is part of your community too. You can't write this off. And by helping all of these people do better, you're going to help the whole community do better as a whole. It's not really an issue of compassion in my mind. It's an issue of an economy. You know, these people are a substantial portion of our economy. They're a substantial portion of our workforce. A lot of the jobs we're adding as a region are lower wage jobs. We're going to need a workforce that is willing to take those jobs, and the longer we delay that, the more trouble we're going to have. I mean, you can see larger cities dealing with their own huge housing affordability challenges, and I don't think we have any reason to believe it wouldn't happen to us if we stay on the status quo. So I think that's something that cities have not figured out how to do well yet, but it's something that a lot of cities are grappling with right now, and it's something that we need to be grappling with in order to move into the next century, I'd say.
Are any of the other hubs dealing with housing?
Not that I'm aware of. It's challenging because it takes so much resources to really build housing or anything that hubs aren't really doing much with it. I haven't tried to do it with our hub just because I didn't know what we could really do. But
Do you know that the United Way under the Opportunity Act, that there's actually several groups? There's the Reentry Task Force, there's the Refugee and Immigrant Alliance RACI, there's the Disability Services. They all have kind of come together, each working somewhat separately, but all focused. I serve with the reentry group, and so although I'm the employment section,
Sure.
there's a lot of focus right now on housing because, yeah, there's a huge demand. Even though we have thousands of units that have gone up, none of them are affordable.
Yes, I know Seth very well. He's told me about your work, so
Yeah,
cool. I'm
wonderful.
the RASI co-chair for housing, so
Wonderful,
Good.
yeah, the opportunity.
I'm surprised I haven't met
Monday
you
night.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm friends.
Beth, you might want to talk about some of the housing work that you've been doing with in your day job, community planning work.
Yeah. So my day job, in a nutshell, rural revitalization. So we work in 7 states right now, going into rural communities, whatever definition that is. Communities from literally a couple hundred people all the way to communities the size of Des Moines. That's some people's definition of rural. So every community we go into, we do visioning sessions, we do quantitative and qualitative assessment. Every single community, this was a surprise, every single community, besides wanting a brewery, of course, top issue has been number 1, housing, and number 2, workforce. So that, of course, has led us to pursue that a bit more. So there's a couple of different things we're working on. I'm trying to remember which one we've talked about.
Housing 360.
Yes. But a couple different things that we're working on. We've actually started to look at this county-wide approach. We really believe that's the future of solving the affordable housing crisis in Iowa and then in other states as well. And of course, there are different opportunities to address that in different states with legislation. But one of the solutions we're looking at with one of the state organizations on a county-wide level is basically a program where we'd set up a revolving loan fund. So what that would be, county could issue a general obligation bond without any referendum or anything. There's state code that allows that for housing. And so they can issue this bond. And some of the counties that we've been looking at using TIF dollars. One of them has been installing new wind turbines, so you get a huge economic impact from that. So a few different things we're looking at, but if you look at what percentage that is of county's total taxable valuation, it's like 0.002%. It's nothing, it's peanuts, as my boss always likes to say. So very small amount, but say you put $1 million from the county, what we're looking at is helping them do some fundraising. So there's another $1 million or so. And then with the state organization that we're working with, they have a couple $1 million that they'd like to get rid of this year. So if we can establish a $3 million fund in one of these rural counties and take any one of the, well, not Polk County, but any one of the other 98 counties, there's some major issues with rural housing. So what we're looking at doing, creating that fund to fill that delta for a developer. It's really hard to get a developer to rural communities because there's so much risk. That are they going to sell these units? Are they going to be able to rent them out if it's apartments? So that's the challenge that we're facing, is how do we get development there? And there's all of this quantitative research that says, we don't have enough problem with rural housing. We have plenty of units. Well, every community that we've worked in, that has not been the case. They may have rental units, but they were last updated in the 70s. They're not the places that we would like to live. So that's a major challenge. And so there's a young family moving to town. They don't want to buy right away. So where do they rent? Well, they have no place to rent. So then they don't move to that community, and it just continues to compound the problem. So the idea, going back to the topic that we're working on, is to develop this revolving loan fund that can be used to, say it's $300,000 that is the delta in what the developer needs to make it work financially. So they can tap into this $300,000. If they own the project for 10 years, then 30% of that loan gets refunded or forgiven, 70% pay off at very low interest rate. And so then the community can continue to reinvest. And really, why we believe this needs to be a countywide approach is that we don't want it just going to the county seat. So I'm from Atlantic, Cass County. Atlantic is around 7,000 people, but There's other small communities in the county that are 1,000 people or less. So the natural thing would probably be, well, let's build some new housing units in Atlantic because that's where the energy is. Well, what happens to those other communities if they don't have those affordable housing options? So let's put it, we're actually looking at a project right now, building a 16-plex apartment complex in a town of 200 people. There's a major manufacturer there that the guy is ready to move his business because his employees can't live anywhere nearby. So by doing that, we're able to get people into the community. They start investing, they put roots down, and then we're able to get that back, that $2 million, $3 million, whatever the amount is, able to get that back through property valuations and through people living in our county versus the next county or the next county over. So that's one of the pieces we're looking at. I think that's probably a little bit deeper than we had talked about in the past. This is all developing. And then I think one thing we're also pretty excited about, I didn't bring my little show and tell, we are looking pretty aggressively at 3D printing housing. So looking at what the construction period is for a typical house, say it's 5 months. If you can put up a house in a couple days at a small portion of the cost, that's a real opportunity for us to get a lot more units in a much shorter amount of time.
About 3D printing, some people know about it, some don't.
So 3D print, basically, I wish I had my little, so say Lindsay's water bottle here, you'd normally have a regular machine to make it. There are printers that you can just print back and forth. So the 3D printing, they're made of, the housing, made of concrete, special mix, quick setting. So basically it's a gigantic arm, if you will, and you program everything and you can put all the wires and plumbing, all that good stuff within the cavity of the wall. And so it just goes back and forth and it's programmed to do the foundation and the walls and everything else. So just look it up on YouTube. It has not been done in the US. It's been done China, Russia. And the big challenge with that is building codes. And that's one of the things we're excited with the rural communities that we work in. It's a lot easier to navigate the bureaucracy there in rural communities versus larger communities, just because there's not so much red tape and people saying, no, you can't do that. It's, well, yeah, let's try it. What's the worst thing that can happen? So we are looking at that pretty aggressively as well.
Do you guys address code at all? Do you ever attend city code?
It really depends on what is coming out of our visioning sessions with our communities. We just delivered a final strategy to Hardin County 2 weeks ago. So that's Iowa Falls, Eldora area. One thing we looked at there, they said, well, every community, there were 7 communities that were part of that strategy. Blighted properties were a major challenge. And because there's towns of 300 people, no one wants to go to their neighbor Josh and say, Josh, you really need to take care of that broken window and that chipping paint. So major challenge. So we put together a program for them to address blighted properties in their 7 communities. Design that so they'd have a county-wide enforcement officer. So all the communities are on the same footing. They have the same code. It makes it easy to enforce. So it really depends on the community. Some of our work down south, of course, there are still dry counties. One of our clients said, well, can you help us not be a dry county? So we never know what we're going to run into.
And maybe isn't the type of code I was referring to, but I get it. I understand their motivation.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think, going back to the question about what makes a great city, it's figuring out what works for your individual community. There are codes and bits and pieces you can borrow from other communities, but it's never going to be a one-size-fits-all. And even in the 17 metro communities, they can try to make things generally the same, but it can't be 100% the same across the board.
How many people do you have in your hub now?
I think we have, 12 on the list. Not everyone comes to everything. We're supposed to be shooting for about a group of 20 or so. Some hubs, the largest hubs have 50 people, and at 50 they cut you off. You're not supposed to have any more than 50.
So like in DC, they have obviously larger community. They actually have 2 hubs because they had that many people.
We've never had that
I
problem.
think if
but-
you have a one over on the computer there, I
Oh,
can
yeah.
have your hub pulled up.
And we certainly welcome, if anyone's interested in joining, we are always accepting new applications for members. So anyone between the ages of 20 and 30 that's interested in getting involved, we are more than happy to talk to you about that. They did not. You still have to join before you're 30.
So, okay.
If you're founding curator, you can be involved.
But there are so many ways that you can be involved with Global Shapers other than being a member, other than being a shaper. You can be a resource for us if you do taxes and you want to do ours for free and help us turn into a 501c3. Talk to us afterwards.
Not your actual tax filings, just the paperwork to become a nonprofit.
Either one. Personally, if you have any expertise or curiosity or you'd like to volunteer, I mean, we're not going to say no, you can't come to our event to help pick up trash along the river with the kids from an inner city school, which we haven't done before, but there are organizations that do that, and we could do lots of things. If you have an idea, your organization needs help doing something, we can help give some energy, mobilize, whatever it is.
Did you have a
We don't
question?
I was just gonna say, I started a nonprofit, and to get my 501c3, I went through the drug legal clinic here, and it's totally free. You guys should totally do that.
We do need to go talk to them, yes.
I can give you this guy's contact if you don't have it. I can give you his contact if you don't have it. You just email him, he sets you up, and it's free.
Cool, thank you.
So what other things besides housing and water make a great livable community in your cohort opinion?
I wanted to go back to what Josh said about housing, because I do agree. I don't think we've done a very good job of looking at that, but I think beyond that, years ago I read some quote, something to the effect of a community is only as strong as the community members who have the least. And to me, I think a community that keeps that in mind, that we're not just looking at that top 1% of people, or the people who are the professionals, or the young professionals, the golden children of the community, that we're looking at the people in the skilled trades, the people that are living in some of these disadvantaged neighborhoods. And to me, that is really what makes one of the things that makes a strong community.
I was going to say also education and children. I mean, as we've been talking about different projects, and when I was in Geneva looking at there were, I think, 100 projects chosen and highlighted with posters describing them from all the hubs around the world. There were everything: mental health, water quality, politics, economic reform. The ones that were about kids, I mean, I just think if you're talking about water quality, starting kids valuing water quality as they grow up. It reminded me of what was the little firefly guy, the little Mid-American guy. I thought it would be cool to make coloring pages for kids about water quality, and cover crops would definitely be part of that. Because kids don't, you grow up on a farm or around somebody that talks to you about cover crops, they're not going to know what those are, how they're important for the balance of the chemicals in the soil. But if I was a kid, I would think that would be a cool way to be engaged.
I did a paper a couple years ago on water in Southern Nevada Water Authority. And I'll tell you what was most interesting is that in the school systems at the kindergarten and 1 to 3rd grades, they're focusing on water. They're trying to get kids to understand the role that water plays in everything from health to leisure, to food production, to entertainment, to recreation, to leisure. And when you have that sort of education, it starts to permeate a culture. And what we recommended finally for the Las Vegas area, because most people think that the real water users are these big resorts. They are not. They're very sustainable. The major users of water are these people who have these lush lawns that irrigate and wash their car. So I think we recommended in one thing, the city actually give passes to these water racks where they could actually get a free car wash. In terms of the infrastructure, it saves so much on water. It pays to actually make that inducement or incentive. But what I learned most about this whole study that I was working on, Jeff, you're on that too, is that once you start focusing on the role that water plays in our lives and why it's important to protect it and enhance it. For example, what we're doing to the Jordan, to the aquifer. It's not a problem unless we run out of water, is it? That's a big problem. So I think that what I really wanted to ask you is, what do you get from working personally? What do you get from working in this hub? Why do you think it is useful to be a shaper? How has it benefited you?
I think personally, I've met so many people locally even that I never would have met otherwise. And finding like-minded people who are interested in working with the community just gives you more opportunities for collaboration, both within the hub, outside the hub. You know, in my work, since I do work for a nonprofit, and a lot of the people in our hub have traditionally worked for nonprofits, thought of other ways that we can work together during our day jobs too, and I think that's valuable. And not even to say anything about all the connections I made across the world. I mean, just as a global networking opportunity is unlike any other thing that you could ever do.
Yeah, the global connection. I mean, I think any kind of volunteering feels good. It feels good to actually be getting your hands involved with something that you know is making a difference, and it's usually something that you can measure enough to know why you did it, why you would go back and continue doing it. There's so much internal meaning to it, but then the global connections that specifically with Global Shapers, because we have other like national organizations in Des Moines, but to know that you were crossing borders and boundaries and walls, sitting on a bus with a girl from Russia and giggling and talking about boys was one thing that I did when I was there, and it just knowing that as strong leaders we have so many things in common, and I think that network as time progresses and as cities become more of a focus than countries, that network will lift those values to a place where there's a much more surface area to communicate as people who want to live in a world that we enjoy living in, if that makes sense. But there definitely is, from a level of just personal gratification to actually helping, doing whatever it is. And there's so much flexibility. It's so versatile. We could do anything we want. No, maybe not anything, but they don't, WEF doesn't really regulate our projects. We have to just let them know what we're doing and some level of impact. But there's so many different ways that we could make projects. We could interact with other organizations, or we could do our own little thing.
The one thing that unites all of them is that we're all just committed to making our communities better places, and you get in a room with 400 of those people from around the world. It's inspiring, and just seeing that there are so many people committed to that idea is really great.
Yeah.
And it gives you a lot of hope for the future when sometimes it doesn't feel like we should. So that's one thing I really took away from, especially the curators meeting.
And also, I mean, I was talking about like the 5K in India, and Bethany talked about digging wells in Africa. I remember one time on the WhatsApp message, somebody sent a message like, we're going up the Amazon River right now as we speak to go deliver this whatever to these indigenous people. And you can't do that in Iowa. I mean, you just can't. You can't go on the Amazon and deliver goods. So like learning about what we're trying to do here, and then what they're doing there, and how that's their real life there. Like that's their daily life. Somebody in Egypt helping young Muslim girls learn how to code. There's a lot of like teaching women how to do sustainable skills, and, which is pretty incredible. They'll find a bus that's just totally broken down in a field, and they'll convert it into a workshop for children to learn how to code. I don't know how to code. I feel like I should be in a bus learning that somewhere. But they're making these things happen with way less resources that our hub actually has. I mean, I think we're very, very privileged to have so many resources, people, monetary. I mean, we haven't had to fundraise really for this event that we're having on Monday. It will be a fundraiser, but we're just like renting a space at the library and buying donut holes. But they have to fundraise a large amounts of money to be able to make some of the things happen that they're doing.
Any other questions or comments? Well, we want to thank you for doing a really nice job. One thing that's kind of interesting is when you start dealing with these sort of issues, like at the Shrunk Foundation or at INSET, the role that these collaborative enterprises play is beyond amazing. For example, an eye clinic in India, completely nonprofit, that becomes state of the art for all eye surgeries and corrections. A near zero infection rate. So whatever caste or class you're in, it's the place of first choice. And how many people do they serve in a year? 6.5 million. Think about that. 6.5 million. More than twice the total population of the state of Iowa. And it's all entrepreneurial and nonprofit. And those examples, and we'll learn more about those at the World Economic Forum. And we're going to also learn about these sort of things that our colleagues have talked about tonight at INSET. And Hans Wall is going to talk about the initiatives that he's involved in around the world as well, and pulling together different resources, collaboration, cooperation, interdependencies. That's the language that we have to embrace. So I want to thank you because you make our program a lot better by participating. And we learned a lot about the programs that you're in. And if any of you have resources you'd like to share, please let our panel know that, because there's a lot of talent also here that you can lean upon. So we thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff has our contact information.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to us. You don't have presentations like this every class, do you?
It's time to go home. Any questions before we leave? Good night, everyone.
Have a good trip.
Yeah.
I'm
I had to sit back
I
there.
know.
So this gives us an idea, and then we'll sign up for sure the next time.
I'm actually not gonna be here next week.
I won't be either.
And put down which ones you want. If they're gonna have to figure out ways to
I have not seen them much. I've been very busy the last while. Just trying to get ready and that. I'll let them know. I saw them today, but they were heading to a meeting.
Yep, I got that done, I picked my own article, the third one is about our destination, so like I have Sistine Chapel. Is there a fourth?
I've been in a lot of meetings.
The group one,
Yeah.
and then this one's
Yeah, exactly.
a presentation or just a report.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the fourth. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So,
This is, the loop. And this is Sistine, our big ones. Oh, yeah, you're welcome. You can see in the academy. So, you'll see people are, there's some confusion.